One of these men bet everything on a single hole in the ground. The other made the exact same mistake, 10,000 times. Guess which one we call reckless? Guess which one became a billionaire? You'd assume the man who failed 10,000 times is the cautionary tale. He isn't. He's the fortune. And the man who did everything carefully, who got every approval, who spent more money than most companies ever will, he's the warning. That shouldn't make sense yet. Good. Hold on to that, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand something about risk that most investors never figure out in their entire lives. Here's the question underneath everything you're about to see. It's not who has more money. It's not even who has more oil or more gold in the ground. It's who can afford to be wrong. Keep that question running in the back of your mind. Every story from here on out is really just answering it. Let's start with the door you have to walk through to even play this game. One of these industries lets you in for less than the price of a house. The other one asks for more than a skyscraper before you've pulled a single dollar out of the ground. Guess which one sounds safer to you right now? Hold that guess. You're going to be wrong about it in about 90 seconds. Somewhere in Texas, an independent operator can drill a shallow well, hit oil, and be collecting checks within weeks. Cheap to enter. Cheap to fail. If the well comes up dry, he's out a few $100,000 and a bad afternoon. That sounds fragile. It isn't. Stay with this. Because the safe side of this story, the one that looks solid, permanent, impossible to lose, is about to blow up in the most expensive way imaginable. High in the Andes, along a border where two countries meet, a company found something almost unheard of. A deposit of gold and silver so large it would have ranked among the biggest mines on the planet. They didn't rush it. That's the part that should scare you. They spent over a decade doing everything the responsible way. Environmental studies. Community meetings. Government sign-offs, one by one. More than 100,000 people applied for jobs there because an entire region was counting on this mine to change their lives. Every box was checked. Every light was green. Then, halfway through construction, a court stepped in and shut it down, over fears the mine would damage glaciers feeding the region's water supply. Costs that were supposed to land around $1.5 billion kept climbing. $1 billion. $3 billion. $5 billion. $8 billion poured into a mountain. And the company walked away with 0 ounces of gold. Not less than expected. 0. That company was Barrick Gold. The mine was called Pascua-Lama. Investors sued. Barrick paid out $140 million just to make the lawsuit disappear, on top of everything already lost. In 2020, after roughly 30 years of trying, they finally gave up on it for good. Just closing the site down properly is expected to cost them another $100 million. Read that again. They're still paying for a mine that never opened. They didn't lose because they were careless. That's the part almost nobody sits with long enough. They lost while doing everything textbook correct. So if doing it right can still cost you $5 billion and nothing to show for it, what does doing it wrong look like on the other side? This is where things flip. In the 1980s, a Greek immigrant's son in Texas became obsessed with an idea his own company thought was insane. Beneath North Texas sat a formation called the Barnett Shale. Everyone agreed it was full of gas, and everyone agreed it was locked in rock too tight to ever get out economically. He didn't listen. For almost 20 years, his engineers drilled well after well into that shale. And almost every single time, the result was the same, disappointing. His own executives started calling it a science experiment. Not a compliment. They wanted it killed. They told him, more than once, that he was burning money the company needed elsewhere. Picture being that man. 20 years in. Your own team thinks you're an embarrassment. Every well is another quiet failure nobody wants to say out loud in the boardroom. But he kept funding it anyway. Then, near the end of the 1990s, one of his young engineers had a conversation at a baseball game with some geologists experimenting with a different fracking mixture. Almost by accident, that conversation cracked something open. A new technique. Cheaper. And suddenly gas that had been trapped in that rock for millions of years started flowing, at volumes nobody on his team had ever seen. 20 years of being called a fool, and then, almost overnight, everyone wanted what he had. His name was George Mitchell. In 2002, he sold his company for $3.5 billion. Today, the vast majority of oil and gas wells in America use some version of the method his science experiment pioneered. So now you've got two men who both failed for years before winning. One of them lost everything. The other one became a legend. What was actually different? Here it is, the answer to the question you've been carrying since the start of this video. Mitchell's failures were small. Each disappointing well cost him a fraction of a fortune, not the whole thing. He could be wrong 100 times and still show up the next morning with enough left to try again. Barrick's failure was one single, enormous, irreversible bet. There was no try again with what's left. There was nothing left. Being wrong in oil is a bruise. Being wrong in gold, at that scale, is a funeral. But don't crown oil the winner yet. That's only half the story. Because oil has its own quiet trap, and it's the opposite problem. An oil well doesn't just risk failing once. It succeeds, and then it starts dying immediately. Production drops year after year, until a well that once gushed cash is basically worthless rock again, and you're forced to go drill the next one, and the next one, forever chasing a curve that never stops falling. A gold deposit doesn't do that. Once it's actually built and running, it can keep producing for 25 years or more, and the gold sitting in the ground gets more valuable every time the price climbs, whether the company does anything or not. One side has to keep sprinting just to stay in the same place. The other side can stand still, if it ever survives long enough to start. So which one actually builds the fortune? Here's the number that settles it. For what Barrick burned on one mine that produced nothing, an operator drilling cheap onshore wells could have taken close to 10,000 separate shots at getting rich. Most of those wells would fail, just like Mitchell's did, for almost 20 straight years. But you don't need most of them to work. You need a small slice of 10,000 attempts to hit, and even a low success rate on that many tries beats one enormous bet that a single court order, a single price crash, or a single missed permit can wipe out completely. Oil doesn't win because it's safer. It wins because it lets you be wrong, over and over, without it costing you everything at once. Gold doesn't offer you that mercy. It asks for the whole fortune up front, and it decides years later, sometimes decades later, whether you were right to hand it over. That's the real difference between these two industries, and honestly, between any two ways of trying to get rich. It was never about which resource is more valuable. It was about who could afford to lose, and keep going. The man who spent less than the price of a house eventually built a fortune out of failure after failure after failure. The one who spent more than a skyscraper did everything right, and is still, to this day, waiting for permission to even start digging.